A dead man sent the letters. At least, that's what everyone believed. The problem was that the man had been buried for more than 25 years, yet somehow his messages kept arriving. One letter destroyed a friendship. Another pushed a woman into despair. Another appeared to drive a respected businessman to commit murder. And every single one ended with the same signature: Zafir, a man who wasn't supposed to be alive. At first, police dismissed the letters as a cruel prank. Then, the bodies started appearing. And suddenly, what looked like an ordinary murder investigation became something far more disturbing. Because the deeper detectives dug into the case, the more impossible it seemed. A killer had confessed. His DNA was found at the crime scene. The evidence was overwhelming. Yet none of it explained why the murder happened. And that single unanswered question would eventually lead investigators to a grave. A grave containing a message that appeared to predict the future. But before detectives uncovered that message, they first had to understand how the nightmare began. And it started with a woman named Dahlia. Damascus was waking up to another ordinary morning when a housekeeper arrived at the apartment of a wealthy businesswoman named Dahlia. She had followed the same routine for years: unlock the door, clean the rooms, organize the apartment, leave before evening. Nothing unusual, nothing complicated, just another workday. At least that's what she expected. After entering the apartment, she headed toward the bedroom, and almost immediately, something felt wrong. Dahlia was lying on the bed, motionless. At first glance, she looked asleep. Then, the details became impossible to ignore. Her body was twisted awkwardly. Part of her remained on the mattress, while her legs hung over the side. Her skin carried a strange bluish color. Most disturbing of all, she wasn't breathing. The housekeeper called her name. No response. She moved closer. Still nothing. Then panic took over. Within minutes, neighbors flooded into the apartment. Emergency services arrived shortly afterward, but there was nothing left to save. Dahlia was already dead. Investigators quickly secured the scene. At first, they considered every possibility: natural causes, accident, medical emergency. But the evidence pointed elsewhere. This looked like murder. Forensic teams began examining the apartment, room by room. One detail immediately stood out. There were no signs of forced entry. No damaged locks, no broken windows, no evidence that anyone had forced their way inside. Whoever entered that apartment had likely been welcomed. That meant the victim probably knew her killer, and that narrowed the field considerably. The medical examiner soon delivered another crucial finding. Dahlia had most likely been suffocated, not with a rope, not with bare hands, with a pillow. Further testing uncovered traces of saliva and blood on both the pillow and the victim's clothing. Microscopic evidence, the kind investigators dream about finding. Because, unlike witness statements, biological evidence doesn't forget, and it doesn't lie. Now, detectives had something to work with. All they needed was a suspect. Fortunately, the building had security cameras. If someone visited Dahlia during the estimated time of death, there was a good chance the cameras had captured them. Investigators reviewed hours of footage. Then they found him. A well-dressed man arriving in a luxury vehicle. He entered the building, stayed for a short period, then left. The timing matched the murder window almost perfectly. Detectives immediately identified the vehicle's owner. His name was Samer, a successful businessman and one of Dalia's oldest friends. When Samer arrived for questioning, he appeared remarkably calm. He didn't deny visiting Dalia. The cameras made that impossible. Yes, he had been there. Yes, she had opened the door for him. Yes, they had known each other for decades. But according to him, it was nothing more than a friendly visit. The investigators weren't convinced, not because of the visit itself, because of the timing. And then the forensic report arrived. The DNA recovered from the pillow matched Samer. The saliva found at the crime scene belonged to Samer. Suddenly, the case changed. This was no longer suspicion. This was evidence. Hard evidence. The kind that destroys excuses. Captain Ayman entered the interrogation room carrying the report. He placed it on the table, then waited. Silence filled the room. Finally, he spoke. The DNA matches. For the first time, Samer's confidence began to crack. The cameras had placed him at the scene. Now the forensic evidence placed him at the murder itself. There was nowhere left to hide. Moments later, he did something nobody expected. He confessed. Not partially, not reluctantly, completely. Yes, he killed Dalia. Yes, he followed her into the bedroom. Yes, he pressed a pillow over her face until she stopped breathing. The confession matched the evidence almost perfectly. The murder appeared solved. But Captain Ayman wasn't satisfied, because one question remained unanswered, and it was the most important question of all. Why? Why would a respected businessman murder a woman he had known for more than 30 years? And when investigators asked him that question, Samer refused to answer. Samer had confessed to murder. That should have been the end of the investigation. The cameras placed him at the scene. The forensic evidence matched. His confession matched the evidence. From a legal perspective, the case was practically complete. Yet Captain Ayman couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Because murders don't happen without reasons. People kill for money, for revenge, for jealousy, for fear. Sometimes the motive is complicated. Sometimes it isn't. But there is always something. And in this case, the motive seemed to be the one thing Samer refused to discuss. The investigators tried everything: patience, pressure, long interviews, direct questions. Every road led to the same dead end. Why did you kill Dalia? Silence. The question kept returning, and so did the silence. Eventually, Samer said something that unsettled everyone in the room. There are things worse than death. Then he refused to elaborate. The statement only deepened the mystery, because Samer wasn't acting like a man trying to avoid punishment. He was acting like a man protecting something, or someone. Something important enough to take to prison. Something important enough to kill for. And perhaps something important enough to die for. Captain Ayman left the interrogation room convinced of one thing. The murder itself wasn't the real story. The motive was. And somewhere behind that motive was a secret that had survived for decades. Unable to get answers from Samer, investigators turned their attention to Dalia's past. They interviewed friends, business associates, former colleagues, anyone who might know why someone would want her dead. Most of the information led nowhere. Then a name surfaced repeatedly: Samia. According to several people, Samia wasn't simply an acquaintance. She was one of Dahlia's closest friends. The kind of friend who knows things family members never hear. The kind of friend who witnesses private conversations, private fears, private mistakes. If anyone knew what connected Dahlia and Samir, it might be Samia. Captain Ayman immediately arranged to speak with her. At last, it felt like the investigation was moving toward answers. Instead, it moved toward another death. When Captain Ayman arrived at Samia's building, something felt wrong immediately. Police vehicles lined the street. Paramedics were already there. A crowd had gathered outside. The detective approached an officer and asked a simple question. What happened? The answer stopped him cold. A woman had been found dead inside the building. An apparent suicide. Captain Ayman asked for her name. The officer answered. Samia. The same Samia investigators had been planning to question. The same Samia who might have known why Dahlia was murdered. Now she was dead before they could ask a single question. The timing was impossible to ignore. One death could be coincidence. Two connected deaths were something else entirely. Inside the apartment, investigators discovered a note. Short, cryptic, disturbing. In it, Samia apologized, but one sentence stood out. She wrote that people's words had become poison flowing through her veins. Captain Ayman read the line several times. The wording felt strange, almost deliberate, as if she were trying to say something without saying it directly. Whose words? What poison? What had frightened her so badly? The note didn't answer those questions. It only created new ones. And before the day was over, investigators would discover something even stranger. Something hidden inside Samia's apartment. Something that would introduce a name Captain Ayman had never heard before. A name that would eventually lead investigators to a grave. The search of Samia's apartment lasted for hours. At first, investigators found nothing unusual. Personal documents, photographs, financial records. The ordinary remains of an ordinary life. Then, one officer opened a storage compartment that appeared rarely used. Inside was a collection of envelopes, dozens of them, carefully preserved, carefully hidden, almost as if Samia had wanted them close, but never wanted anyone else to find them. Captain Ayman immediately sensed their importance. People don't hide ordinary letters, especially not for years. The first envelope seemed harmless. Then, investigators started reading, and the atmosphere in the room changed. The writer knew things. Not general information, not rumors. Specific details, private details. Events from decades earlier. Conversations that should have been forgotten. Decisions that only a handful of people could have known about. The deeper investigators read, the more unsettling the letters became. Because they weren't threatening, at least not directly. There were no demands, no blackmail payments, no countdowns, no warnings promising violence. Instead, they did something far more disturbing. They reminded. Every letter seemed designed to force Samia to revisit parts of her life she desperately wanted buried. And somehow, the writer always sounded calm, patient, almost friendly, as if an old acquaintance had decided to reopen wounds she had spent years trying to heal. Then, investigators noticed something else. The letters repeatedly mentioned people from Samia's past. Old friends, old relationships, old secrets. Again and again, the same theme appeared. trust no one. Be careful. Some of the people around you know more than you think. At first, the message seemed vague, but after reading enough letters, a pattern emerged. The writer wasn't simply sharing information. He was creating doubt, planting suspicion, slowly turning old friends into potential enemies. And judging by Samia's condition before her death, it had worked. Then Captain Ayman reached the bottom of one letter and saw the signature, Zafir. The same name appeared at the bottom of the next letter, and the next, and the next. Every envelope ended the same way, Zafir. At the time, the name meant nothing, just another lead, another person investigators would need to identify. But Captain Ayman had no idea that this unknown man would soon become the center of the entire investigation. The envelopes created another mystery. They came from different countries: London, Paris, the United States, several other locations. At first, investigators suspected multiple people, but the letters didn't feel like the work of multiple authors. The writing style was identical. The tone was identical. The psychological pressure was identical. Everything pointed toward a single writer, one person, operating from everywhere at once, which made absolutely no sense. Then, a discovery changed the direction of the investigation. Several letters mentioned Dahlia. Others mentioned Samer. Only briefly at first, but enough to catch Captain Ayman's attention. 3 people, all connected. Dahlia, Samia, Samer. One murdered, one dead. One sitting in prison. And now, all 3 were somehow linked to these mysterious letters. At that moment, Captain Ayman stopped viewing Dahlia's murder as an isolated crime. The case had become something much larger, something older, something hidden. And he was beginning to suspect that the answer wasn't waiting in the present. It was waiting in the past. A second search was immediately ordered. This time, investigators returned to Dahlia's office, not her apartment, her business office. If Samia had received letters, perhaps Dahlia had too. The search lasted most of the day. For hours, investigators found nothing. Then, one officer opened a secured compartment. Inside was another collection of envelopes, the same style, the same handwriting, the same careful preservation, the same signature, Zafir. The room fell silent, because now there was no doubt. Someone had been contacting both women for years, and whoever that person was, they seemed to know everything. Captain Ayman now faced a troubling possibility. What if the motive for Dahlia's murder wasn't hidden in recent events? What if it stretched back decades? Back to a time long before businesses, wealth, and success. Back to university. Back to a group of friends whose lives had remained connected long after graduation. A group investigators still knew very little about. Fortunately, there was one person who might help change that. A woman living thousands of miles away. A woman who had once belonged to that same circle of friends. And unlike the others, she was still alive. The phone call lasted less than 15 minutes, yet it changed the entire investigation. The woman Captain Ayman contacted had once belonged to the same university friend group as Dahlia, Samer, and Samia. Years earlier, she had moved to the United States and built a new life. Unlike many of the others, she was far removed from the chaos now unfolding in Damascus, which made her one of the few people investigators believed might speak honestly. At first, the conversation was routine. Yes, she knew Dahlia. Yes, she knew Samar. Yes, she knew Samia. And yes, they had all been close friends during their university years. Then Captain Ayman asked the question that mattered most. Who else was part of the group? The woman began listing names. Amar, Rana, Fadi, others. Then she mentioned one final name. Zafir. Captain Ayman immediately interrupted her. Until now, Zafir had only existed as a signature at the bottom of mysterious letters. For the first time, he was speaking to someone who had actually known him. What can you tell me about Zafir? There was a brief pause. Then the woman answered, May God have mercy on him. Captain Ayman froze. For a moment, he thought he had misunderstood. Then she clarified. Zafir was dead. He had been dead for years. The room fell silent, because if that was true, the entire case suddenly became far more complicated. Every letter, every secret, every psychological game, every carefully crafted message, all of it carried the name of a man who supposedly died more than 25 years ago. Captain Ayman ended the call and immediately ordered a full background investigation. Death records, government records, family records, anything connected to Zafir. The answer arrived quickly. Officially, Zafir had died on May 22, 1993. The records were clear. No missing person report, no unresolved legal questions, no indication that he had survived. According to every official document available, Zafir had been buried for decades. And yet his name was somehow controlling the lives of the living. While investigators struggled with that mystery, another crisis was unfolding inside prison. Samar was changing. The calm businessman who once seemed composed now looked increasingly terrified. Prison staff noticed it first. He barely slept. He paced constantly. He seemed distracted, restless, almost as if he were waiting for something to happen. Then came the requests. Again and again, Samar begged for permission to make a phone call. Not to his lawyer, not to a business associate, to his wife. The desperation caught investigators' attention immediately. People rarely become that frightened unless something important is at stake. Captain Ayman ordered the call monitored. Whatever Samar wanted to say, investigators wanted to hear it. The moment the call connected, Samar began speaking. Fast, urgently, like a man racing against a deadline. He instructed his wife to go directly to his office, find a hidden compartment, locate a sealed envelope, then destroy everything inside. Burn it immediately. He refused to explain why. He simply repeated the instructions. Find the envelope, destroy it, don't let anyone see it. Then he hung up. Captain Ayman reacted instantly. If Samar was panicking over documents hidden in his office, those documents mattered. A search team moved immediately. The race had begun. Would investigators reach the office first, or would Samar's wife? The answer could determine whether crucial evidence survived. When officers arrived, they found her exactly where Samar had directed her, standing beside the hidden compartment, moments away from retrieving the envelope. The contents were seized before anything could be destroyed, and when investigators opened it, they discovered exactly what Captain Ayman feared. More letters. The same handwriting, the same style, the same signature. Zafir. That discovery changed everything. Now, investigators knew something important. Dahlia had received the letters. Samia had received the letters. Samer had received the letters. This wasn't random. This wasn't personal. Someone was targeting the entire group, one member after another, and the consequences were escalating. One was dead. One was dead before investigators could question her. One had committed murder. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore, which raised a terrifying possibility. What if the letters weren't simply exposing secrets? What if they were pushing people toward decisions they never would have made otherwise? And if that was true, how many members of the group were still in danger? Captain Ayman was about to find out, because while investigators were piecing together the mystery, the surviving members of the group were already falling apart. By now, fear had become the most powerful force in the investigation. Not evidence, not witnesses. Fear. The surviving members of the old university group were reacting in very different ways, but all of them were reacting. Because deep down, they understood something the police didn't. At least, not yet. The letters weren't random. They were personal. Painfully personal. Every envelope proved the same thing. Whoever was writing them knew things nobody else should know, and that terrified them. The first person to disappear was Fadi. One day, he was attending meetings and answering calls. The next, he was gone. His phone stopped responding. Employees couldn't reach him. Friends had no idea where he was. Rumors spread quickly. Some believed he had fled the country. Others believed he was hiding somewhere inside Syria. Nobody knew the truth. The only thing everyone agreed on was this: Fadi was scared, and people rarely abandon their lives overnight unless they're running from something or someone. Ammar handled the situation differently. At first, he tried to continue living normally, but after Dahlia's murder and Samia's death, normal no longer seemed possible. Every new letter increased his anxiety. Every headline made things worse. Eventually, he became convinced that waiting for answers was dangerous. If something was happening to members of the group, he didn't want to be the next victim. So he disappeared too. But unlike Fadi, Ammar chose an unusual hiding place: a private psychiatric hospital. Officially, he wasn't a patient. Unofficially, he was living there, away from the public, away from questions, away from anyone who might be looking for him. To outsiders, the decision sounded absurd. To Ammar, it sounded brilliant. Who would think to search for a healthy businessman inside a psychiatric facility? The irony was that the thing Ammar feared most continued finding him: the letters. No matter where he went, they kept arriving, each one carrying the same familiar signature: Zafir. Every envelope forced him to revisit old memories, old decisions, old secrets. The letters never openly threatened him. They didn't need to. Their power came from what they revealed and from what they implied. Because with every new letter, Ammar became more convinced that the writer knew far more than anyone should. If Ammar chose hiding, Rana chose defense. By the time Captain Ayman learned what she was doing, her home looked more like a fortress than a residence. Security cameras covered the property. Additional guards had been hired. Alarm systems had been upgraded. Visitors were carefully screened before entering. To outsiders, it seemed excessive. To Rana, it wasn't enough. Because fear had already taken hold. And fear doesn't disappear just because doors are locked. Captain Ayman noticed something disturbing. The letters weren't physically harming anyone, yet people were changing because of them. Friendships were collapsing. Trust was disappearing. People were isolating themselves, running, hiding, preparing for enemies they couldn't see. It was almost as if the writer understood exactly how fear operates inside the human mind. Not dramatic fear, not panic.
Something slower, more dangerous. The kind that grows quietly until it controls every decision a person makes. The kind that destroys lives long before anything actually happens. And whoever was behind the letters seemed to understand that process perfectly. Then something changed. For weeks, Ammar had focused entirely on protecting himself. But eventually, another possibility entered his mind. A dangerous possibility. What if one of the others was responsible? The letters had already destroyed trust. By now, every surviving member of the group had wondered the same thing. What if the enemy wasn't an outsider? What if the threat came from inside the group itself? The idea sounded paranoid, but so had the idea of a dead man sending letters. And yet, here they were. One murder, one suspicious death, one confession, and a growing list of terrified people. The deeper Ammar thought about it, the more convinced he became that hiding wasn't enough. If he wanted to survive, he needed answers. And the search for those answers was about to reveal something shocking about the man whose name appeared on every letter. A man named Zafir. A man who, according to official records, had been dead for more than 25 years, but whose influence seemed stronger than ever. As fear spread through the surviving members of the group, Captain Ayman focused on a different question. Who was Zafir? The name appeared everywhere, at the bottom of every letter, at the center of every theory, at the heart of every conversation. Yet the deeper investigators looked, the stranger the man became. Because unlike the others, Zafir wasn't known for wealth. He wasn't known for power. He wasn't known for influence. People remembered him for something else. His mind. Former classmates described him as unusually intelligent. Not the loud kind of intelligence that demands attention, the quiet kind. The kind people only recognize after years of knowing someone. According to those who studied with him, Zafir was fascinated by human behavior. Why people lie, why they fear, why they betray one another. Why guilt follows some people for decades while others seem unaffected. Long before the investigation uncovered the letters, Zafir had spent years studying those questions. And the more Captain Ayman learned, the harder it became to ignore the connection. Because the letters felt as though they had been written by someone who understood exactly how guilt works. Someone who knew how to reopen old wounds without making direct threats. Someone who knew that fear often becomes more powerful than violence. Zafir's life had not begun in Syria. His family had roots in Egypt, where several relatives still lived. Eventually, he moved to Syria, pursued higher education, and built a life there. He married, made friends, created plans for the future. To outsiders, it looked like an ordinary life, a promising one. But life rarely follows the plans people make. Years later, tragedy struck. His wife died in a traffic accident. People close to him said the loss changed him. Not dramatically, not overnight, but something shifted. The cheerful young man they once knew became quieter, more reflective, more withdrawn. Yet despite everything, he continued moving forward, until his own death years later. Or at least, what official records described as his death. That contradiction continued haunting the investigation. If Zafir had truly died decades earlier, then someone else had to be sending the letters. But who? And why go to such extraordinary lengths? The more Captain Ayman searched for answers, the fewer answers he found. Then, the case exploded into public view. It began with a journalist named Wahid. Unlike ordinary reporters, Wahid specialized in stories powerful people preferred to keep hidden. Scandals, corruption, mysteries, stories capable of dominating headlines. One morning, an unusual email appeared in his inbox. The subject line immediately caught his attention. Letters from the grave. Curious, he opened it. Within minutes, he realized he was reading something extraordinary. The email described Dahlia's murder, Samia's death, the mysterious letters, and the growing suspicion that a dead man somehow sat at the center of it all. The story sounded unbelievable, which was precisely why people would read it. Wahid published the story. The reaction was immediate. News websites picked it up, television channels discussed it, radio hosts debated it. Social media erupted with theories. Some people believed Zafir had faked his death. Others suspected a vast conspiracy. A few even insisted supernatural forces were involved. Captain Ayman hated those theories, not because they were popular, because they distracted from the truth. Every mystery has an explanation. The challenge is finding it. And despite all the rumors spreading across the country, Captain Ayman remained convinced of one thing. Somewhere behind the letters was a human being. The problem was proving it. The public attention created another problem: pressure. Questions arrived from everywhere. Journalists, officials, the public. Everyone wanted answers. And eventually, that pressure pushed the investigation toward a decision many detectives had been quietly discussing for weeks. A decision that seemed extreme, but by now, it was unavoidable. If they wanted certainty, they needed to answer one question once and for all. Was Zafir really buried where everyone believed he was? There was only one way to find out. They would have to open the grave. The decision wasn't made lightly. Opening a grave is one of the most extreme steps an investigation can take. It requires approvals, legal authorization, careful planning, and most importantly, a compelling reason. By now, Captain Ayman had plenty of reasons. A dead man's name appeared on dozens of letters. Those letters had already been linked to a murder, a suspicious death, multiple disappearances, and a growing national scandal. If Zafir had somehow faked his death, the entire mystery would suddenly make sense. The letters, the secrets, the manipulation, everything. But first, investigators needed proof. The request was approved. Zafir's grave would be opened. As news spread, public interest exploded. People wanted answers. Some believed investigators were about to expose one of the greatest frauds in recent memory. Others thought the police were chasing a fantasy. After all, what exactly were they expecting to find? A man who had supposedly been dead for more than 25 years wasn't likely to be sitting inside waiting for visitors. Yet the possibility lingered. If the grave were empty, everything would change. On the morning of the exhumation, the atmosphere felt different. Even experienced investigators seemed unusually tense. Everyone understood what was at stake. For Captain Ayman, this wasn't simply another step in the investigation. It was a crossroads. Either the mystery would become simpler, or it would become far more complicated. The excavation began slowly. Workers carefully removed layers of earth, minute by minute, hour by hour. Nobody rushed. The grave had remained untouched for decades. Any mistake could destroy valuable evidence. As the excavation continued, reporters gathered outside the cemetery. Rumors spread online. Thousands of people followed updates as if they were watching a live mystery unfold. The entire country seemed to be waiting for the same answer. Who was Zafir? Eventually, the excavation reached the burial chamber. Investigators moved closer. The first thing they noticed was exactly what they expected to find. Human remains. A skull. Bones. The unmistakable evidence of a burial that had taken place many years earlier. At first, Captain Ayman felt relief. The grave wasn't empty. That ruled out one of the most obvious theories. Zafir had not simply vanished and spent decades hiding. He had been buried here, just as the records claimed. For a moment, it seemed as though the investigation had reached another dead end. Then one of the workers noticed something unusual. Partially hidden beneath the remains was a small object. At first, it looked insignificant. A piece of debris, a forgotten item, something accidentally buried decades earlier. But the closer investigators looked, the clearer it became. This object didn't belong there. It had been placed there intentionally, carefully, deliberately, waiting. The object was removed and cleaned. It was a small black metal box, protected from moisture, protected from time, and buried directly beneath the remains. The discovery immediately changed the mood, because objects don't bury themselves. Someone had put it there. The only question was who, and perhaps more importantly, why? Captain Ayman watched as investigators carefully opened the box. For a moment, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The cemetery had become completely silent. Inside the box wasn't money. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't a photograph. Instead, there was a single folded piece of paper. Just one, protected so carefully that it appeared almost untouched by time, as if the person who left it expected someone to eventually find it, and expected it to survive until that moment arrived. Captain Ayman unfolded the note. Then he started reading. At first, he wasn't sure he understood what he was looking at. So he read it again, and then a third time, because the words seemed impossible. The note began with a single sentence, a sentence that instantly transformed the entire investigation, a sentence that nobody standing in that cemetery would ever forget. It said, "I know you are opening my grave now." For several seconds, nobody spoke, because in that moment, it felt as though a man buried for more than 25 years had somehow reached out from the past and addressed them directly. For several seconds, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The words seemed to drain the air from the cemetery. Captain Ayman stared at them.
Note:
Then he read it again. "I know you are opening my grave now." The sentence was impossible to ignore, not because it was mysterious, because it was specific. The writer hadn't predicted that someone might investigate him one day. He had predicted this exact moment. The grave, the investigators, the search for answers, everything. Captain Ayman continued reading. The note anticipated the very questions investigators had been asking for months. No, Zafir had not faked his death. No, another body had not been buried in his place. The remains inside the grave belonged to him. The writer seemed to understand precisely what investigators would suspect, and one by one, he addressed those suspicions before they could even be voiced. The note felt less like a message and more like a conversation taking place across 25 years. Then came another shocking detail. The writer explained why the note had been buried there, not as a prank, not as a joke, as evidence. He wanted investigators to compare the handwriting, to verify that the note had genuinely been written by him. The implication was staggering. Whoever left this message expected authorities to eventually question his death, expected them to open the grave, expected them to compare handwriting samples. The level of planning felt almost unreal. Yet the note existed, physical, undeniable, resting in Captain Ayman's hands. The document was immediately sent for analysis. Handwriting experts compared it to verified samples connected to Zafir. The process took time, but when the results arrived, they only deepened the mystery. The handwriting matched. The note had indeed been written by Zafir, which meant one thing. More than 25 years earlier, Zafir had somehow anticipated this exact investigation. Not every detail, but enough details to leave investigators stunned. News of the discovery spread quickly, much faster than the police wanted. Within hours, journalists were discussing the note. By the next day, the entire country seemed obsessed with it. Television programs debated its meaning. Experts offered theories. Social media exploded. Some called Zafir a genius. Others called him a manipulator. A few insisted the note prove something supernatural. Captain Ayman rejected that idea immediately, because despite how impossible the mystery appeared, he knew there had to be an explanation. There always was. The challenge was finding it. Yet even Captain Ayman had to admit something. The note changed everything. Before the grave was opened, investigators were chasing a suspect. After the grave was opened, they were chasing a plan. A plan that appeared to have been set in motion decades earlier. A plan carefully constructed by a man who had been dead for more than 25 years. And for the first time since the investigation began, Captain Ayman realized the truth might be far older than anyone imagined. The answers weren't waiting in the present. They were buried somewhere in the past, in the friendships, in the secrets, and in the events that took place long before Dahlia was ever murdered. The grave had not solved the mystery. It had only revealed how much bigger the mystery truly was. As investigators left the cemetery, one thing became clear. Everything they believed about the case had changed. Dahlia's murder was no longer the center of the story. Neither were the letters. Neither was Samer's confession. Those were only pieces of something much larger, something that began decades earlier, long before the bodies.
long before the investigation, long before anyone had heard about letters arriving from around the world. Somewhere in the past, a group of university friends shared a secret powerful enough to survive for more than 25 years, a secret capable of destroying lives even after all that time. One by one, the people connected to that secret were being pulled back into its shadow. Some were dead, some were hiding, some were living in fear, and somewhere behind it all stood a man named Zafir. A man who was unquestionably dead, yet somehow remained at the center of everything. Captain Ayman now had more questions than answers. Who was really sending the letters? Why had they waited so long? What connected the members of the old friend group? And most importantly, what happened 25 years
Ago that was still powerful enough to terrify them today? The answers existed, he was certain of that. But finding them would require going back to the beginning, back to university, back to the friendships, back to the moment everything started. Because the note inside the grave wasn't the end of the mystery, it was the beginning. And what investigators would discover next would explain everything.